that you're going to have to look at them differently as customers. Those potential customers have gotten used to online platforms like OnlyFans, where adult performers offer videos, live streams, and personalized text chats for a fee. COVID changed the dynamic for the adult nightclub industry because you have customers that couldn't go to clubs, so they got used to whatever interaction they would typically have with an entertainer. They started to have that interaction on OnlyFans. Some strippers set up OnlyFans accounts when the clubs were closed, and a few of them have earned big money, catering to tens of thousands of fans at once. Layla was an early adopter, but she thinks the site's impact is limited.
I think people overestimate the effect of OnlyFans on stripping. What you come to a strip club for is completely different than OnlyFans. The guys who are coming into a strip club want a strip club. They want the touch.
But she does think younger customers are looking for something they won't find at most strip clubs.
People want something more intimate. When guys walk into the club, it's kind of an intimidating experience. You get walked in by a guy in a suit, you get brought to a table, there's a lot of pressure. It's very intense. Younger guys don't want that kind of experience. They don't want to feel like they're being sold to. They want something that feels real.
In their quest to figure out how to draw this generation into the clubs and keep them there, owners are starting to invest in talent retention. Some clubs did things like renovating their locker rooms. Some even have tanning beds or other things to make it a more comfortable experience for the entertainers. Because if you're in a larger city, you're competing as a club, not just for the customers, but you're competing for the best entertainers. They're going to dance where they know they can make money, but they also want to know they're going to be treated well and valued for what they bring to the operation. Some strippers are pursuing other approaches. In the past few years, dancers at clubs in California and Oregon have voted to unionize. Washington State recently passed a law known as the Strippers' Bill of Rights, which includes wide-ranging workplace protections for strippers. And in response to the Federal Fair Labor Standards Act, in some states, strippers are being classified as employees rather than independent contractors. But neither Manik nor Layla believes these developments will lead to industry-wide change. And dancers are in a tough position because the number of places they can work is getting smaller. Cities and municipalities for years have done everything they can, for the most part, to close clubs down or keep them from opening. They're just not looked at as a desirable business. As a result of zoning laws and other regulations, it can be difficult, if not impossible, to open a new strip club. Manik says that isn't necessarily a bad thing. The better clubs, the better run clubs, the better operated clubs are the ones that are still here. It is not an industry for just anybody. You do have to fight a lot of battles. There are a lot of people that want to close you down. Layla is 28 years old, and she has no plans to stop stripping anytime soon.
I would retire, when I feel like I'm in a place to. Right now, I am working less compared to how I did when I was younger. That's kind of common. You have to pace yourself to last in it. Because, that's kind of how girls burn out younger, is that they just, party through it. You get better at the job. The way I work now is smarter, and I think the clientele that I have is better. You adjust as you get older if you want to survive.
For the economics of everyday things, I'm Zachary Crockett. This episode was produced by Julie Canfer and Sarah Lilly, and mixed by Jeremy Johnston. We had help from Daniel Moritz Radisson. We found Layla through her very funny Twitter feed.
My Twitter handle is Botticelli Bimbo.
Thanks for listening.
I enjoy being mansplained about stocks. Like you're drunk in the club telling me all this insider trading information? Thank you.
The Freakonomics Radio Network, the hidden side of everything.
Stitcher.
all together in one room.
Yay! We're in Warsaw!
Welcome to Warsaw. Wojciech has organised a wonderful few days for the whole of the Europeans podcast team to explore his wonderful city of Warsaw while we discuss some important things that we never get around to discussing and think about the future of this little baby podcast of ours. And today we thought, because we're all together, that we would bring you a little Q&A, question and answer episode.
Yeah, it's the first time we've ever done this. So we've asked our supporters to write in with basically any question that they have ever wanted to ask us. And producer Katz, you have the list, I believe, in front of you.
I do have the list. Let me see. Federica asked, what is your feeling about the EU compared to when you started the podcast years ago? Do you think the institution is stronger, weaker, and what do you think about the level of support you see across the continent? Oh my god, the world is unrecognizable. So much has changed. What do you guys think?
Was that you at the end, or was that?
That last bit was definitely me. I was like, oh my god, that was Katz's response.
What a different era. I mean, it makes you realise just how long we've been making this podcast. That we started this podcast in the Jean-Claude Juncker era, which is so mad. Like, Ursula von der Leyen was not already in power as the quote-unquote Queen of Europe. And something that I think I've really noticed is that how the EU communicates has got a hell of a lot better since we started making this podcast. I don't know if you would agree with that. But when we first started this podcast, I mean, one of the main missions we had was to demystify this weird beast that was the European Union, which is incredibly powerful and has a lot of power over how we live our daily lives, but we didn't know how it worked. And that job of understanding it was made a lot more difficult by the fact that the EU at the time was incredibly bad at communicating. And yes, sometimes it is still bad at communicating, but I think they have got a lot better at using plain language and explaining what they do in a kind of normal person way.
I find this a really difficult question to answer because honestly I wasn't taking much notice of what the EU was saying before we started this podcast.
Yeah.
Like, part of the reason why we went on this journey was because we realised ourselves that we had no idea what the EU actually did and who the people were that were running it. So I find it hard to know how much of it is that we've just spent 7 years podcasting about the European Union and Europe more broadly, and now I actually am just aware of what's going on and therefore think it's better and how much they've actually improved. I think they probably have improved.
A little bit. And when you look at things like, you know, tangible things like election results, the turnout, we've covered 2 European elections now.
Elections is?
Against me, girl.
This is my better language, thank you. We've covered 2 European elections now, and turnout has been slightly up in both of those. Maybe only slightly, but I think it does show very, very slightly that people are paying a little bit more attention to European affairs than they were, maybe.
I also think it's a hard question. I have the same as Dominic, that I just didn't know that much about what the EU was doing. And now I'm like, oh, they're so important. Maybe that's just because the biggest change from my perspective is that I know what they're doing a bit more now. But I also just think the world was such a different place. Like, the most dramatic thing was like, oh my god, Brexit just happened. Like, there's that kind of major level of news now every week. I mean, like, war felt really far away. There were so many things that just I don't think we could have dreamed of. Not just the EU, but like Europe and the world has changed completely.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is that, you know, as a person from a country that joined the EU pretty late, I remember I took it for granted that this is like the final product of European democracies working together, and then like, woo, Brexit happened. Then like we have this surge of far right and like a lot of, you know, anti-European Union, you know, forces being really, you know, having their say now. So yeah, to me it's been like the process of realization that this project really requires some effort from all of the parties to really be what it is supposed to be. And I think it's good. And I think that some of the energy that I felt like, you know, 20 years ago fizzled out. A lot of people are slightly disappointed, but then I see how it really works in some areas and how important it is, even like given that we have this new ideas for what Europe could be. So I think it's a work in progress, and it probably will be forever.
I think something that's going to be really interesting to keep an eye on in the next few years is how attitudes to the EU change in candidate countries. Because there are all of these countries that have been kept hanging for years already in the West Balkans, and, you know, EU membership has been sort of dangled as a carrot for good behaviour, and like, oh, maybe one day, very, very good, we might give you this very precious. And certainly, you know, if you ask people in countries like Albania maybe 6-10 years ago how they felt, attitudes were extremely positive and everyone really wanted it. And now it feels like in several of these countries, people are starting to get really pissed off with just how long they've been made to wait for this thing that might never happen. So that's something I certainly want to keep an eye on with this podcast in the next few years.
Next question.
Okay, this is from Joanna, and she says, okay, this is a personal one. I presume you won't answer, but maybe you will. I want to know how...
Reduce speed ahead.
I want to know how you're coping with managing this podcast and with your bubba, as in your baby. How are you finding it, having to turn your brain into such a different mode again? Has it been easier or harder than expected to combine these parts of your life? Maybe it's also interesting because we have two members of our team that have kids. Do you want to answer this question?
Yeah, I assume it's for me. That wasn't actually specified, but I am the person here with the baby. It's been a really mixed experience. In some ways, I live in a country, France, where it is taken for granted for most parents that mothers will go back to work at about 3 or 4 months, which is pretty early by the standards of a lot of other rich countries. For me, that's something that I like and appreciate, and that works for me because I like my work. My work is quite a big part of my identity and who I am. But I won't lie, it was really, really tough, and the way that things worked out for us was we were making a big series about Oatly just after I had my baby, so that was really fun, recording pops with you guys about, 10 days after giving birth?
We don't talk about that.
A big public apology to Katie Lee.
Very giant public apology.
That's my fault too. Something I found as a journalist and a parent is that at the very beginning I found it really hard to care about current affairs and the news. You turn inwards when you have a little person arriving in your life. And for weeks I found it was a mixed thing. It was on one hand really hard to care about what was happening in politics, and in another way I kind of appreciated it because it forced me to care about stuff that was happening outside my home. And I think a lot of people don't have that privilege. I think I'm going to call it a privilege. But it's been hard, there are some late nights involved in making this podcast, quite a lot of juggling. But I think we're doing okay. My baby is still, in one piece, so that's good. And so am I.
Yeah, I'm really proud of you. It's really nice to see you learning, and we all didn't know what was going to happen.
Yeah.
Least of all you, on how this would influence the podcast. And it's nice to see how it's evolved.
It also means that, we have now 2 parents on our team, and so more people interested in making stories about things like childcare. I am really, really keen to make a story comparing childcare systems across Europe in the next few months/year. So watch this space. I really hope that's something that can happen. But Wojciech, you've got 2 kids, slightly older than mine.
Yeah, basically, my life changed completely, my professional life when I had my first kid. I was also changed professions, but now it's something that really gives me energy to work. I would maybe have to work 2 days a week if I didn't have kids, and probably that's what I would do. And the funny thing about it is I'm the person who picks up kids from school/kindergarten, so I have this dead zone in the middle of the day, which is 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. where a lot of people want to have interviews, they want to have meetings, which is a bit uncomfortable, but it's you can accommodate. But obviously then you end up with late nights, which I'm trying to limit now, but they still occur sometimes, especially with the special episodes. Next question?
Yes, Dominic and I will be representing the polyamorous subject of this podcast for the foreseeable future. Moving on swiftly. Anna says, how does the week look like for you? I think you record on Monday, so what happens on Tuesday? Is there a weekly schedule? I think it's very impressive, Anna, that we record on a Monday.
It is impressive. Well, often on Tuesday mornings at the moment. It used to be Monday sometimes.
Yeah. It's true.
For some reason it's become mostly Tuesday morning.
There were actually quite a few questions about our process, how do we make the podcast and how do we find our stories, and so I sort of jumbled them all into one. But it seems like people really want to know how we make this thing. It's nice to let them in.
Well, we have a Monday morning meeting where we start discussing stories that we might want to talk about in Good Week, Bad Week, amongst the 4 of us, and then Katie and I usually spend Monday researching whatever topics we've chosen, and then we record on a Tuesday, and then a combination of Katie and Wojciech, or sometimes Katz, or sometimes another producer called Morgan, edits the rambling that me and Katie have done on that Tuesday morning into something that's a bit coherent.
Yeah, the interviews sometimes happen at different points in the week, depending on how newsy it is. So sometimes we'll have an interview that is about something that's happened that week, maybe the European elections, for example. So that will be done probably on the Monday or Tuesday morning, and then Tuesday is spent editing, cutting down the show and making it sound all nice. And then Wednesday, I tend to give it to you to listen through, and you say, no, take this out, I sound stupid. And then the rest of the week, we are mostly looking forward to future episodes and thinking about future guests. We do have a very active Slack channel where we drop things like, oh, this might be a good story for later in the week. Often those ideas come from our listeners, so our listeners will message in or drop stories on our
Reduced speed ahead.
Patreon Facebook group, or send them in by email from different corners of Europe, and we'll think, oh, that might be an interesting thing to cover in next week's show. So we'll drop it in the Slack, and then spend early the next week scrolling back up that list and thinking, oh yeah, those are the 2 stories from the week that would be really good to cover.
Something that's worth mentioning, and I get asked a lot about that, is whether our interviews are edited, so they. They are. We usually talk to our guests for 20-25 minutes, and then it's being cut down to 12 minutes, which is usually very challenging because our guests are awesome and you would like to play the whole thing. Yeah, so they are heavily edited because like half of what was recorded goes into the final cut. And Wednesdays for mixing too, which is a very important part of this operation.
I don't know what we do without you, boys.
I think
without you, boys.
I think people maybe don't even know what mixing is.
Yeah, so just one sentence about it. It's like everyone records in their own space, like, you know, across Europe, and the point is to make it sound even and pleasant for your ears and to have it project through like your noises around you, like when you're on the bus or on the train. So yeah, so that's the part that I take care of, and I take a lot of pride in this.
It's a much underappreciated part of making audio, I feel.
It is.
I think people think that we just turn up and talk in front of a microphone, and actually, this is one of those things where a load of work goes into making the European sound as good as it does every week.
Absolutely. Oh, I like this. like this one. Owen asks, do you ever wish that you didn't all live so far away from each other, or are you glad that the podcast is so pan-European?
Oh.
Yeah, I can start with this one. I do find it quite hard, like, how much of my work is behind a laptop, because one of the reasons that I love making radio is that I get to, like, go out into the world and talk to people, and that's been such a valuable part of working at the Europeans, I think for 6 years now, wild, is, like, going and talking to all these people in, like, rural Hungary or wherever, and learning about their lives, and I wish that was a larger percentage of it. And I think in terms of working together, we've gotten so lucky that we as a team get on fairly well, because a lot of our work time is like being very efficient through a screen, which I think is very conducive to like, you don't have a lot of time to have fun together or understand each other or whatever. So I think we've gotten really lucky. So I really do think it contributes to the quality of the show that we're really all looking at current affairs from different national perspectives. I really don't think it would be as strong if we all lived in the same place. But it would be nice to be able to do what we're doing now sometimes and like have a drink. We do that like once a year max, and that I think would be nice if it was a little more frequent.
Yeah, sorry to get all mushy for a second, but it's times like this where we're all together in one place and we've been like drunk cycling.
No, of course we haven't.
Oh, sorry, cycling.
Nothing illegal.
And like just having a really fun time together and having all kinds of conversations. So I do really wish that we lived in one place, but it does make me feel really lucky that I get to work with 3 really good friends at the time.
Imagine if we had an office
Incredible.
where we could all go every day.
Where would it be? Where's equidistant between us all? Berlin,
Probably. Okay.
Done.
We're moving.
We can just be that train teenager and have the office on the train and just move around each other's
I'm
countries.
referring to this man who lives on a train in Germany, like every day of the year. He doesn't know that.
It'd be really fun for the engineering and the mixing.
But it's true. It's so nice working with you all, and it's so nice being together in one place and seeing
Reduce speed ahead.
your whole self, not only your whole bodies, because we only ever see the head and neck on Zoom, but like just experiencing what it's like to have conversations that don't have to fit into a 1.5 hour Zoom meeting.
Yeah.
You really have time to talk about other things and reflect on how things have been, which is why it's so important that we do this once a year, have this summit.
What I will say is that you are all extremely tall, and I spent the last 2 days running after you with my little short legs. I'm not even that short, but you're all giants. It's really exhausting.
Kat and I are making a real effort to walk slowly.
We had like a 10-minute conversation about how we could feel our core muscles really having to work hard because of the slower pace of the walking.
And
guys
people
were having some interesting conversation about parenting and podcasting, and we were like, my core muscles are very confused. No, I think you also start, I mean, you work this long together and you care about each other, and you also get curious like what is happening in your lives and how is it to be living in this country when this is happening, and we get a tiny bit of time to talk about that, but not much. So that is really very, very nice. This is a good one for you, Wojciech. Are you guys planning to make an AI-translated podcast anytime soon? I remember you talked about it last year, and you had some experimenting already. That's my favorite podcast. I wish for more people to listen to it. Aww.
Yeah, so I remember, it's actually a short but funny story. So last year we met in Amsterdam, and we had this fantasy that maybe one day in the future that would be possible that some machine would translate whatever we were saying into all the official languages of the EU. And then 6 months later we produced the first piece where some of the quotes of our guests from Bulgaria, Hungary and Poland were actually translated by AI, and we thought that this was really amazing, and everybody that listened didn't notice that it's a translation because actually the protagonists, we could hear their voices, and they were just speaking flawless English despite not knowing the language. So we see this as an opportunity. It's not yet there. We're trying to automatically translate the entire episode, and it was funny. Maybe we can play a clip.
Why don't we play me with an extremely Québécois French accent? Because it's very weird for me to hear myself speaking French, but as if I'm Canadian.
Mais en fait, vous savez comment je suis la mère d'une petite personne française ces jours-ci? J'apprends beaucoup de chansons pour enfants françaises parce que j'ai grandi avec les chansons anglaises, mais je pense que mon enfant français devrait bien sûr connaître toutes les vraies chansons françaises.
Yeah, it does something to accents. Like the last time we voice cloned Dominic, he was like Aussie/Essex. Yes, /Essex. It was pretty funny. But yeah, but it is the future, and I think it's gonna come sooner than later.
And we have big plans on that front, if anyone has a lot of money to give us to help develop them.
Reduce speed ahead.
self-development.
I mean, there's a couple of things for us specifically that are really exciting about this, and one of them is that, you know, you can't subtitle podcasts. That's always been one of the frustrating things about making audio internationally as opposed to some sort of video project. You can't subtitle it. So in the first years of the podcast, we relied quite heavily on using voiceover artists.
Bit sad for the voiceover artists.
Yeah, we might be inadvertently firing a whole bunch of voiceover artists. And really, ever since the beginning of the podcast, we've mostly relied on guests that can speak very, very good English. And I would really love to make the show a bit more diverse by being able to speak to a much wider range of people and potentially get this podcast into the ears of people that don't speak English. How cool would that be?
Absolutely. I think we're also lucky as a team because we have like 7 to 10 languages between us, so it's not total, but it just really adds to the listener experience. Like, we can still talk to people in our language, because I don't want people to think that we're just like full-on Anglophone team.
Yeah.
That would really not be accurate, but yeah, I think it really changes the listener experience rather than having one of us translate.
The best part about this experience was that when I first cloned voices of our protagonists for that story, I was afraid that they were going to be mad at me, or like, you know, it feels like you're stealing something from them. Obviously I asked them in advance, but then